Now, that kind of brings us to kind of the French Revolution and the limits of liberty that we kind of see in America. Partly, the Federalists kind of were turning towards Britain because they really were afraid of some of these really radical forms of democratic thought. In the wake of Shays' Rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion, other internal protests, Federalists really sought to preserve social stability, and they feared that radical democracy would not allow that to happen. And then, when the French Revolution and how that goes, it kind of confirms what they think. So by 1789, news arrives in America that the French had revolted against their king in a very, very bad way. They had basically beheaded him. They took him out, got the guillotine, cut his head off right in the middle of the town, and overthrew the government. It was really kind of crazy. The French Revolution was insane. Now, at the time, for quiz purposes, you need to understand how Americans viewed this. Most Americans imagined, hey, the French helped us fight in our revolution. They took those ideas of liberty home, and now they're fighting their own revolution. This is a good thing. You know, they're taking the ideas of liberty from America to Europe, and, you know, that's wonderful. They kind of praise the French Revolution. And towns all over the country host speeches and parades on July 14th to kind of commemorate the day that the French Revolution begins. You know, women kind of dress up in neoclassical dresses, and they honor Republican values, and men pinned revolutionary, like feathers and stuff on their hat. And they're like, yeah, this is great, you know. In early 1793, a French ambassador shows up, Edmond Charles Genet, and he arrives in the United States. During his tour of several cities, Americans greet him. They're crazy. They think this guy is great. But then he starts saying some crazy stuff. Like, hey, America, you know who we are fighting against? Britain. And you know who Britain is aligned with right now? Spain. So you know what y'all should do? Attack Spain in Florida. And America was like, whoa, dude, you can't just be saying that stuff. Like, we're not going to go to war with Spain. Are you crazy? What is wrong with you? Shh, be quiet. He's like, oh. George Washington tells him, yeah, we're not doing that, bro, like at all. He says, oh, well, I guess I'll just have to go and talk to the people directly and see if they'll get behind it. And Washington was like, you probably need to leave, dude. Like, you're going to get us in trouble. We're not trying to be involved in all that. So how about this? How about you go ahead and leave the country, go back to France? Here's the problem, though. By the time Washington basically kicks him out, the party that had originally overthrown the king was now being overthrown again, because they didn't set up a constitution like we did. They didn't create a system that was going to last. Their system was an absolute mess. And so by the time he is supposed to leave, his own group is being like slaughtered. They're taking everybody's head off. Okay, and he's like, I don't want to go back. And so his intuition to kind of stay is correct, but this radical coalition of revolutionaries had seized power in France, and they initiate a very bloody purge against their enemies, and this becomes known as the Reign of Terror. They behead some like 2,000 people in the middle of town in like several months, like including like the political leaders of the other party and stuff. Like they arrest them and then take them out and cut their heads off. It's kind of crazy. And Americans, as they learn about this and the mounting body count in France, they kind of start to have second thoughts about their support for the French Revolution. They're like, oh, yeah, that's not how we should do that, actually. That seemed like that was going to be good, but those French people are crazy. Like, that's a little further than you have to go. A lot of Americans feared that the French Revolution was kind of spiraling out of control. And those people kind of became Federalists, and they kind of said, hey, you know, the people that supported and said, no, this is great, those people kind of became Republicans. Thomas Jefferson was one of those people. He actually said that he would rather see half the earth desolate than to see the French Revolution fail. Were there but an Adam and Eve left in every country and left free, it would be better than it is now. That dude literally pulled a straight up Thanos. That dude was like, kill everybody, as long as whoever's left believes in liberty. Like, kill them all. Like, that's Thomas Jefferson. The dude was a radical. Okay? Meanwhile, the Federalists are looking around and going, hey, Britain, you're not so crazy after all. Will you be our friend? All right? Now, despite all of this, turmoil, there came a sign of hope in the United States because George Washington, after 2 terms, decides he doesn't want to be president anymore. And people are like, wait a minute, we thought that was like a joke. We thought we were going to elect George Washington. He was just going to be president until he died. And so basically we would be just electing monarchs every, 4 years or whatever. And he was like, no. Somebody else needs to take the reign. One person shouldn't have this job forever. So he decides, I'm going to step down. And believe it or not, America peacefully elected a new leader who didn't even agree with Washington. And Washington, after the election, could have been like, I'm just kidding, guys. Y'all chose the wrong guy. I'm going to stay in power. And everybody would have been like, okay. In fact, there was a lot of people going, hey, George Washington, John Adams is kind of crazy. He's got some really kind of weird ideas. Are you sure you don't want to stick around? And Washington was like, no. I said I'm going. Y'all elected somebody new. If we don't honor that, America means nothing. So he steps down. He also establishes this precedent of not having more than 2 terms. And so it kind of, gives some hope that the American system would work, right? Now, Adams, who was the vice president, was far less beloved than the old George Washington was. And he immediately takes over a very deeply divided nation, and that's going to test him fairly quickly. In response to Jay's Treaty, that's where they signed it with the British, the French government authorized its vessels to attack American shipping. And so to resolve this, President Adams sends envoys to France in 1797. He says, hey, go work this out. Make France stop attacking us. And on this trip, one of the worst scandals of the time takes place. And it's called the XYZ Affair. And you need to understand what happened here for quiz purposes. They insult the American diplomats when they get there, and the Americans codename these French people X, Y, and Z in their correspondence. And they basically say, the French say, we're not going to negotiate with you until you pay us a lot of money to help us fight. Now, when this comes out, it makes Americans furious. They're like, we were supporting you, and now you're trying to bribe us just to stop attacking us? All of a sudden, people are like, hey, go attack France. And so President Adams pledges his support against France. People are eager for war against them. And all of a sudden, people all over the place are kind of like, hey, let's fight the French. They feared that French had covert agents in America and that an invasion was imminent and that the French were going to come in and get the slaves to revolt against the South and all this stuff. It was super paranoia. And so now you've got this crisis going on. Citizens in New England become very outspoken opponents of France. They form a new reason for what's known as Francophobia. Influential Massachusetts minister Jedediah Morris announced to his congregation that the French Revolution had been hatched in a conspiracy led by this mysterious anti-Christian organization called the Illuminati. That the French, he invents the Illuminati. He says the Illuminati are these French people who are trying to take over American Christian thought and ruin it. Yeah, scary. Obviously, the story's a hoax, but the rumors of the Illuminati's infiltration spread throughout New England like wildfire, and they add a new dimension to this foreign threat. Lots of conspiracy theories. Against this backdrop of fear, the French quasi-war, as it becomes known, was fought in the Atlantic, mostly between French naval vessels and American merchant ships. During that crisis, however, anxiety about foreign agents was really high. And so Congress says we have to do something to keep these French agents from taking over and subverting our goals. And so they passed 2 acts called the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. And what they're meant to do was prevent French agents and sympathizers from compromising America's resistance against the French Revolution. Now, the Alien Act The Alien Act, and for quiz purposes, you need to know these two acts. The Alien Acts allowed the federal government to deport any foreign national who they thought might pose a national security threat. But the Sedition Act was even crazier. It allowed the government to persecute anyone who was found to be speaking or publishing false, scandalous, or malicious writing against the government. Now you go, wait a minute, you can just throw somebody in jail for saying something against the government? That doesn't sound very American, right? Of course it doesn't. These laws were not just brought on by, war hysteria, they were also reflected, common assumptions about the nature of the American Revolution and the limits of liberty. Most advocates for the Constitution and the First Amendment accepted that free speech in the First Amendment simply meant a lack of censorship and restraint, so that you couldn't keep somebody from printing something, but once it was printed, you could be punished for it. That's what they thought the First Amendment meant. However, other people said, no. That means that you can't be punished for what you say at all, which is kind of how we see it now, right? And so basically, this is a huge debate about the true meaning of the First Amendment. Most Federalists were inclined to agree that the First Amendment did not guarantee no persecution, but a lot of Republican printers even get thrown in jail for stuff they print against the government. John Adams is very, in favor of the Alien Act, and he forces lots of foreign nationals to leave the country. He arrests lots of people that are critical of him. It does cause a backlash, though, because, people don't like it. People say, no, there should be independence of the press and all of this, that free speech meant that you should virtually be able to say anything without fear of persecution. And eventually, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson get the two states of Kentucky and Virginia to pass resolutions that say, basically that the national government's authority was limited only to the what was expressly granted in the Constitution, and that the states could declare whether or not a federal law was unconstitutional, which is a major thing to try and say. These resolutions were kind of simply gestures of defiance, but their bold claims really had effects later on. In just a few years, a lot of Americans' feelings towards France had changed dramatically. They were no longer rejoicing, the light of freedom, but they now feared the contagion of French-style liberty, of cutting people's heads off. And it really gave Americans some of the earliest opportunities to kind of define what it meant to be an American and what American national character kind of was, and have this universal vision of liberty. And so it also kind of, set in motion what some of these early foundational ideas would become in the United States. I can't go anymore.